In this story, the so-called doubting Thomas is unwilling to believe the resurrection of Jesus until he sees the proof for himself. He won't take his fellow disciples' word for it and insists that he needs to see the wounds in Jesus' body with his own eyes and even feel them with his own hands. A week later, Jesus obliges. He recreates the entire entrance, coming in through the locked door, declaring, "Peace be with you," and displaying his body's wounds for Thomas to examine. This particular scene has been illustrated 100 times over in classical paintings, stained glass, carvings, statues, woodcuts, sketches, the list goes on. Fair warning, if you Google them to see for yourself, they tend to depict the exact moment that Thomas is sticking his fingers into the gash in Jesus' side. Wouldn't recommend if you're squeamish. These depictions tend to show Thomas with squinted eyes and furrowed brow, not just doubting, but skeptical, verging on suspicious. In some paintings, I would even call his expression disdainful. Once Thomas has sufficiently investigated and assuaged his doubts, he declares, "My Lord and my God." Jesus responds in short, "I'm glad that you believe it now, and I'm really glad that, some people didn't need to see me to believe." At surface level, it seems that the lesson we're meant to take from this story is this: you shouldn't need to see for yourself to believe. Your faith and your belief should be strong enough on their own, even in the absence of any rock-hard evidence. Thomas, who did need to see for himself, is somehow lesser than those who didn't, defined by this moment and forever christened Doubting Thomas. I take issue with this interpretation because I am most certainly doubting Lauren. Thank you. About a year ago, I was asked to take the Enneagram test for a mentorship program at work. For those who aren't familiar, the Enneagram test is a bit like the Myers-Briggs. You answer a bunch of questions and are categorized into one of several personality types. In the Enneagram system, each type has a number and a title. In this mentorship program, they were pairing us up based on sort of compatible Enneagram types. I love a good personality test, so I was excited to see what I would be. After dozens and dozens of questions, I completed the test, clicked to see the results, and I was a type 6, dubbed the skeptic. I know, right? I read through the summary. Type 6s are defined by their desire for safety and security. They fear uncertainty and worry about being unable to protect themselves from unknown dangers. They cope by over-preparing for every possible scenario and key feature, asking a lot of questions, because the more information they have, the better prepared they can be. I was infuriated. Who had gotten inside my head like this? And then as I kept reading, that amused annoyance shifted to despair. It said that in some cases, people might develop a type 6 personality because they grew up in an unsafe environment as a child. They learned by necessity that they needed to protect themselves from an inherently dangerous and unstable world. This childhood vigilance formed the foundation of the mindset with which they approached their adult lives. I was heartbroken. I was 30 years old. I had been going to therapy regularly for several years, and I was actively working through the various traumas of my childhood. And yet here I was, my personality still defined primarily by that trauma, still more than any other trait, a skeptic, a doubter, afraid. What really twisted the knife in the wound was this. My secondary Enneagram type, coming in a very close second, was the type 2, dubbed the helper, defined as being loving, trusting, generous, warm, nurturing, gentle. I saw this as the me that I was supposed to be, the kind and empathetic person I strived to be at my core. But my true self was buried under the weight of trauma I was evidently still too small to bear. My fear was bigger than my love. And this is how I ended up crying at my desk at work after taking a personality test. And this is why I have such empathy for doubting Thomas. Neither Thomas nor I were born as doubters. Children are inherently loving, trusting, and kind. And if we're lucky, and if we're careful, those children can grow up to keep their loving hearts, even as the malice and misfortune of the world conspires to break them. Those loving and trusting children can grow up to be loving and trusting adults. But that doesn't always happen. And in fact, I would argue it doesn't happen most of the time. Sometimes we end up with an adult who asks too many questions, who won't take our word at face value, who can easily think of a dozen reasons why an idea might fail, who doubts in the absence of rock-solid evidence. And we might think, geez, Louise, can't they just lighten up? But instead, we might think a gentler thought. Carrying all those fears must be a heavy burden. And instead of, why are they so negative all the time? We might think, why are they so negative all the time? What must they have gone through to be this way? Because fears, doubts, questions, critiques, caution, they don't pop up out of nowhere. They're learned through experience. I wonder what Thomas's life must have been like. I wonder what fears and worries he must have carried in his heart, what past disappointments or betrayals or hardships he must have experienced. I wonder if he ever felt out of place among the other disciples, if he ever mentally lambasted himself for being the negative Nancy of the group. Why can't I just trust like they do, he might have wondered. Why can't I just stop with all my worrying and my questions? No one else seems to need as much reassurance as me. Everyone must think I'm so annoying. There's something wrong with me. I know I've thought those thoughts. But we see Jesus respond not with annoyance, as Thomas might have feared, but with gentleness. Without judgment, he provides the reassurance that Thomas needs. He shows the holes in his hands and the gash in his side and invites Thomas to touch them each in turn. I imagine Thomas carefully investigating these wounds, not with an expression of suspicion, but an expression of the smallest, most tender hope, and the gratitude of being understood and welcomed exactly as he is. Because this is what it looks like to offer unconditional love, to show someone that you will support them and reassure them, even if you don't share or understand their fears. Love looks like checking under the bed for monsters every time you're asked. You don't just promise it's fine and ask your children to believe without evidence, you show them. Love looks like offering welcome to everyone at every service here at Hillside, including the Thomases with doubts in their hearts and questions on their lips. You don't just hope that people will feel the good vibes, which are present. You tell them clearly and directly. Love looks like meeting people where they are, not where you wish they were, or where you think they should be. It looks like saying, I know these fears are difficult for you to bear, and that's why I will be here to help you carry them. And so it feels strange to me that Jesus ends this kind and compassionate scene in which he shows his unconditional love for Thomas by saying, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. It feels like a bit of a jab at Thomas. But perhaps we can arrive at a more generous interpretation by discussing Thomas's name. Thomas comes from the Hebrew word ta'om, meaning twin. He is also sometimes called Didymus, which is Greek for twin. So whose twin is he then? Jesus' twin. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus speaks to him, saying, Brother Thomas, now since it has been said that you are my twin and my true companion, examine yourself, learn who you are, in what way you will exist, and how you will come to be. Since you will be called my brother, it is not fitting that you be ignorant of yourself. They're not literal twins related by blood, although some scripture does indicate that they bore a similar appearance. Rather, I imagine them as twins in the sense of being a mirror or a counterpart to one another. Thomas, the doubter, the fearful one, needing reassurance, the Enneagram type 6 skeptic. Jesus, the believer, the loving one, offering reassurance, the Enneagram type 2 helper. All of us carry these two twins, these two selves within our hearts. And sometimes our skeptic feels bigger than our helper. Our fear feels bigger than our love. And at least for me, it can be easy to slip into a feeling of hopelessness and anger and injustice, wondering why that fear has to be so big and so overwhelming, why I am primarily a skeptic and a worrier instead of a helper. But in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus does not say, since it has been said that you are my twin, I really need you to up your game and get on my level. I need you to get over this whole complex you have going on and just be cool like me. What he says is, examine yourself, learn who you are, in what way you exist, and how you will come to be. There is no judgment in who Thomas is. Jesus is not condemning him or asking him to change. He is only saying, I want you to understand yourself. I want you to see yourself clearly with no personal judgments or biases about yourself, and have compassion for yourself, exactly as you are. So what do I see when I look at myself clearly? No matter how powerful my fear became, it never destroyed my love. On the Enneagram test, my helper score was only one tiny fraction behind my skeptic score. Just as powerful, just as much a part of me as anything else. My love could not be killed, and even though I thought my heart had suffered too much for love to possibly survive, it rose again. It came to greet my fears, passing gently through locked doors, and showing me the wounds in its hands and in its side despite my doubts, and saying, I'm here, and I will always come back to you every time. That is what Jesus is blessing when he speaks to Thomas. He is blessing the part of all of us, that loves without end, the part of us that trusts in goodness, the part of us that endures, the part of us that continues to hope through all hopelessness and darkness, the part of us that believes, even in the face of all evidence to the contrary, that things are going to be okay. And even if that part of us seems smaller than our fears, and its voice in our hearts is too quiet to hear on our darkest days, he is telling us that it is always there. And even if we can't see it in the moment, it's there. If you might indulge me in putting just a few words in Jesus' mouth, we might therefore rephrase his blessing as this: Blessed is the part of you who has not seen proof of better days, and yet still believes that they are coming. Blessed is the hope that you carried in your heart all the way into this moment, alongside all your fears. One of my favorite poems by Emily Dickinson beautifully describes hope as this: Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And so I want to offer you the same blessing that Jesus offered to Thomas, from my doubting heart to yours. Please join me in a spirit of prayer. May you see yourself clearly and hold all of your facets with equal compassion and kindness. May you be gentle with yourself and your worries, and may you remember that all of those worries and fears are your heart's way of trying to protect yourself from danger. And in that way, each and every one of your doubts is your heart saying over and over, I love you, I love you. May the hope in your heart keep singing, and may you always hear it, whether it's faint as a whisper or powerful as thunder. And may you leave the doors of your heart open to love, and even if they're locked, may love find its way in anyway. Amen.